We say to students, I see you and I care for you. And I'm looking at you. I'm on your team. I see you. We always talk about individualization, right? We're moving from I see you and I care about you. And then we're moving to this piece that they call performance feedback, which is really interesting because the belonging cue that you're giving there is exactly what you're saying, which is we as a community have high standards and I believe that you can reach them. Good afternoon. You've joined me for another episode of Cap and Gown. I'm Rachel Phillips-Buck, VP for Student Success for Ferris Resources. I'm going to wait for everybody to slowly trickle in. Hey, Debbie. I was just telling my guest today, Dr. Woosley, who is at NASPA with us. We were just talking about that conference and the presentation we got to do. So good to see you. We have a lot to talk about today. I'm going to do State of the Union, and then I'm going to invite Dr. Woosley on to talk with us more about sense of belonging, which you guys know we've talked about before, but Matt and I talked last week about this idea of moving from a scared brain to a connected brain. And so that's going to be our topic today. So I'm really excited. We've got a lot of great conversation and, as always, a lot of great action items. So let's dive into State of the Union. There's kind of a lot going on, but it's like really broad and kind of all encompassing. So I want to just maybe give some summaries of some things that are going on. There's a new book that I want to read. It's coming out very soon. It's called Breaking Ranks: How the Ranking Industry Rules Higher Education and What to Do About It. So you guys remember we talked about the rankings last week and just how that's kind of a game and there's all of these crazy things going on, people increasing their rankings. This is a book specifically about those rankings and why the author's like, hey, I know it's one of the most complex and expensive purchases that a family makes, so you want some guidance. But also, here's his example. Let's say you have a student, Chad, who's a conscientious student from a working class family who's skilled at carpentry and craves the thrill of a packed football stadium. Then you have Tanya, who is the only African-American student in her high school class who took both physics and advanced calculus. And another child, Maureen, who is the student government president and captain of her tennis teams. So then the author says, in a world of such diverse stories, is there a single best college? So this idea that we are tailor-made for certain kinds of students, we support them really well. And manipulating your rankings is kind of crazy town. You guys heard me say last week, University of Chicago. So remember, 20% of those rankings is about how selective a school is. University of Chicago is not happy with their ranking. They were only number 15. So they, in 2006, started a campaign where they raised their applicant pool from 9,000 students to 35,000, which made them way more selective. So now they're almost always in the top 10. So that's just an example of the craziness that's going on with those US News rankings. I'm sure that I will have a lot more to say about that as I get this book and read more about it, but that's out and I think it's pretty interesting. Okay, an interesting article in the New York Times. Did you guys see this? A 4-year degree isn't quite the job requirement that it used to be. So this is coming out of the Burning Glass Institute, which is an independent nonprofit research center. They are looking at labor markets. Basically, this article is just saying that because of the labor crunch, lots of different employees are looking to expand their applicants instead of restrict. And one of the ways historically that they've restricted is by saying you have to have a college degree. So in 2017, 51% of the jobs required a college degree. By 2021, the share had declined to 44%. So it's pretty interesting talking about certifications. You guys know Microsoft and Google are saying, hey, we're going to help our people get certified in all of these different things. They're not going to need a college degree. So that's a really good read. There's a lot of kind of data and intricacies in there, but I would recommend that you read that one. One more that I'm going to recommend that you read. This is coming from Higher Ed Dive. It's what 7 experts want included in Biden's new Title IX regulation. So they are going to, the U.S. Department of Education is going to release their proposed regulation changes on Title IX, which is always such a joy for all of us, because for those of you who are in charge of Title IX, I know that that is such a complicated, difficult, important, stressful job. So thank you guys for doing that. But also they revise their regulations all the time. And so we're expecting to get a new one under this administration. I would encourage you to read this Title IX regulation, because they talk to advocates for sexual assault survivors. They talk to presidents of smaller institutions. They talk to a lot of different lawyers, and they're like, hey, what would you like to see in this new regulation that you think would make it better? So there's a lot of really good ideas in there. One of the things that I really like that's highlighted specifically from Joshua Richards, who is a lawyer, he says, it's really important for us to have flexibility instead of adversarial hearings. That has been a win for students and institutions. In appropriate situations, it gives students valuable agency in determining through consensus how matters should best be resolved, and it gives institutions the ability to adapt their responses to the needs of their students. Anytime an institution can respond to a student's Title IX concern in a way that leaves all parties feeling heard and avoids the need for the school to have to act like a court of law, it's a win. I hope that the department keeps letting us get those wins in an incredibly difficult area. So I think it's a good example, especially for some of our smaller schools. It's just a huge burden to try to do that right and make sure that you are following all of the regulations. So if you are in charge of that, or if you're just interested in kind of what's happening in that area, that would be a great article. I think Rachel has chatted that one to us so that you can read it. Okay, 2 more. Really interesting article inside Higher Ed. It's called Political Interference in Higher Ed is Becoming Endemic. So this article is about how in a lot of ways, historically, schools have had autonomy from politics. But then because of COVID, a lot of schools were having to follow the governmental guidelines for reopening. They had to submit their reopening plans and meet state standards and all of that kind of stuff. In addition, our schools started getting a lot of money from the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, Economic Security Act. Like, so the government was pushing a lot of money into schools. And we all know that when we invite the government into our schools and giving money, then they start to have some leverage and kind of want to control things. And so they're talking about, in a lot of different states now, the government making rulings on who should get tenure, how you can rescind tenure, what you're supposed to teach in your classroom. I think there's probably like a whole cap and gown we can do on our schools' autonomy, and then how we're also relying on federal funding and those sorts of things. So pretty interesting article. I would encourage you to go read and just kind of see all of the different threads that are woven together in that one. Okay, and then my last one, which this is my favorite one. There's a professor, David Berkovitz, who teaches business law at Chapman University in Orange, California. He has just filed a lawsuit against an unnamed group of students because he discovered that somebody in January uploaded his exams, his midterm and his final exam, to this website called Course Hero. I don't know if you guys have heard of this before. I had not. So it is a website that lets students share their lecture notes and sample quizzes and syllabuses and other things like that. Students can subscribe to get to all the content, but then also people are using this as a way to cheat, because you can just upload tests and then people can download it and then they have it, right? So this faculty member found out that somebody had done that to his midterm and his final, and he wanted to know who this group of students was that uploaded it. I really like what he said. He said that because he grades on a curve, he's worried that the students who cheated caused their classmates to then not get the higher grades that they deserved, because these other people already had the test and they were getting hundreds. So also, don't mess with lawyers, man. because he, first of all, copyrighted his tests and then contacted Course Hero and said, hey, you are infringing on my copyrights. And they were like, yeah, you're right. We don't allow any copyrighted things to be on this website. And so then he issued a subpoena so that now they have to tell him who all of the anonymous students are, which I think just goes to show you, like I said, don't mess with lawyers, because I just love the genius of copywriting your test and then being like, nope, you have to take it down and tell me all the people who did that. So that is the state of the union today. I'm so excited for us to dive into our content today, and I'm going to invite our guest on, Dr. Sherry Woosley. You guys know and love her. Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
I just love the conversation around this topic today. So you guys know I'm in the middle of this book, The Culture Code. We talked about it last week. Super, super helpful. I was telling Sherry as we were talking before that I have been really convicted about these little cues of belonging. And I don't know, Sherry, if you've had this experience with sense of belonging, but I understand what it is, but I've had a hard time sort of grabbing hold of it in a way that is actionable, which you know how I love actionable.
Yeah.
It's like everybody knows what it is and they recognize it when they have it and they recognize when they don't have it, but how we articulate and build a specific culture that's sending those belonging cues, I've really wrestled with. I don't know if you've had that experience at all.
Well, I think so. I mean, don't forget, I'm a researcher, so I need to define things if we're going to measure things, right?
Yeah.
So, absolutely. And I think over the last 3, 4, 5 years, when we've been really sort of diving into it, that was the thing that was so stunning, is that there isn't necessarily a great definition out there that has well, and this happens to me every time I hit a topic I think is intuitive. Okay, where's my scale? There should be a scale of 5 questions, 10 questions that measure this. And there's lots of different ones.
Right. And that's what I think. So I know that we've talked about this before. I've talked about it a lot on the show in general, but I think it's that we're constantly looking for, like, here's this research, here's this framework, here's this evidence, right? And so I think it's why we wrestle with it, because there's not, like you're saying, there's not a clear, like, when I say sense of belonging, everybody knows here's what I mean, and here's what we're talking about, and here's how it's defined. It really is, I think it's frustrating because it's kind of a buzzword, but it also to me is like the most important thing, right? So having this, like, oh yeah, people talk about that all the time, and then being like, I know, but do you actually do it in a way that we can measure and we can be intentional about? I think both of those things are true, right?
Well, and I think for a concept like this, what you expect is there to have been, like in self-efficacy research, Bandura wrote the book called Selfefficacy. If you want to understand what it is, where it comes from, what it affects, what the research said at the time that he wrote his book, that's the classic.
That's where you
and
go.
Then from then on out, just look every book that referenced him or every article that referenced him, because you know they're grounded.
Yeah.
And there isn't a sense of belonging book like that. There isn't a researcher who has done everything. Yeah. There are stuff coming. There is that book that I wrote that chapter for, but I haven't seen the rest of the book. It comes out in, I think it's August now, but who knows? Like, and that's every chapter is written by different people. So I don't know that that's going to be the classic, but maybe there's a chapter somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see.
Well, what I'm finding really helpful about this book in terms of the cues of belonging is I just look back, you know, we laugh about I was an at-risk student, but I just look back on so many of my experiences and the definition of moving from risk, like I'm looking for risks, right? I'm constantly vigilant. I have not moved into these are my people connection brain kind of language. And I like framing it that way, because I think if we just say on a campus, you need to constantly be helping your students remember to be in that connection brain mode, which we talked about last week, is this like, you are my people and I'm paying attention and I'm open to opportunities, right? And all of that kind of stuff. I don't know if you do this, Sherry, maybe it's because I'm an introvert, I don't know, but it's like when I go to a conference, I do that in my brain intentionally, right? I don't go to a conference with like my armor up and I'm like, I don't know who these people are, right? But you have to go and be like, okay, I'm open to connection. We have things to talk about. At NASPA, I met a random woman on the street, but she had her badge on, so I knew she was one of us. And so we had a great conversation. Like we talked about all sorts of things because I was in that connection brain. And I just love that in terms of helping us understand how to do that for our students. Do you do that at conferences? Are you always in the connection brain?
No, not at all. I'm an introvert
really?
too. I sit in my basement and I love it. But I think you're right. Like at a conference, the badges help a ton. So even when I'm walking from my hotel to the conference, if they have a badge, I know they're safe in connection and I can walk with them and oh, you're going to the conference. Who are you? Where are you from? And I put on my extrovert, which I guess is the connection brain, right? I'm in extrovert mode. I have to do that for 4 or 5 days and then I can come home.
But
don't you think you do it in a lot of situations? Because I was thinking about this, like whenever I start a new hobby or a new location or a new something, you go, okay, I got to be in this mode of, I don't know what I'm doing and it's safe. It's okay. I'm making connections so I can get there. So I walk into the guitar center and everybody is a 20-something-year-old guy musician. And I go, I'm here to learn drums. I'm here to make connections, even if they're nothing like me. And you have to like do that with your brain.
Which can we just talk about? So we're going to get to what schools should be doing, right? For like in community, but can we just talk about the self-coaching part of that, where you say to your brain, I need you to settle it down. We're not looking around and saying like, oh, we don't belong here. We don't belong here. You belong here. You should be here. And you're going to start looking for those connections. I love that because I do that in parenting all the time where I'm saying, like, we talk about self-soothing, right? So where you say to your kids, like, hey, I know that you feel overwhelmed or you feel sad or whatever. You just have to tell your brain, it's okay. I'm okay. Everything's going to be fine. I just love that of teaching our students what that looks like and how you do your self-management to say, I'm moving myself now into connection brain. There are opportunities here for me to meet people and find a space, and I do belong here, and it's hard, but it's going to be great in a minute. That's good advice.
Well, and don't you think too, there's a component of that for me, like walking into the Guitar Center, I'm going to suck at this and it's okay. Because otherwise your brain goes, I'm going to suck at this and I'm going to be judged and I'm going to be like all the risks, right? So you have to like embrace part of this connection is being a beginner.
Which is really helpful if you think about college students. I would say one of the really hard things for me as a college student was that my parents loved college. They talked about it in terms of like, it was the best time of their lives. And so I went like, hey, this is going to be awesome. And then I was like, in the transition, I was like, this is terrible. Right. But
I'm not confident. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm lost. I'm scared. And nobody said that here's the things you're going to have to do, or you're going to have this time period and you're going to have this. And then the other question is, what is the school doing to help with that? What are you doing? What's your family doing to help with that?
I love that. Okay. So a couple of things in this book that I think are super concrete, which I really like. One of them is talking about how we invite people into that connection brain. How do we move them into that connection brain? And there's 3 things that they want us to move between. One is an individual perspective. So we say to students, I see you and I care for you. And I'm looking at you. I'm on your team. I see you. We always talk about individualization, right? we're moving from I see you and I care about you. And then we're moving to this piece that they call performance feedback, which is really interesting because the belonging cue that you're giving there is exactly what you're saying, which is we as a community have high standards and I believe that you can reach them. So I'm going to give you this feedback about how you're doing because you're one of us and I know that you can be successful here. But I think in order to receive that, you do have to say to your brain, we're growing. This is hard because we're learning new things, right? We're growing. And then also, so from individual to feedback cues. And then the last one is a big picture perspective, which is like, hey, life is bigger than anything we're talking about right now. So I understand you have a whole context, you have a family, you have a hometown, like you have a lot of stuff going on that I want to acknowledge and remind you, like, this is just one little piece of what we're doing. And I love that because I think if in every encounter with the student, if you moved through those three, and it's not just like 1, 2, 3, it's like you flow back and forth between that, right? I see you, I care about you, I'm going to give you feedback. And then also there are way more important things in life. So good.
Yeah.
They talk about magical feedback, which when a faculty member writes this on a paper, that can be revised. So like they go through and they're like, hey, your paper wasn't great, blah, blah, blah. Here's all this stuff you can do, but you can revise it. When a faculty member writes this on the paper, the student is 50% more likely to make a revision and some way higher grades come out of this. Okay, here's the magical feedback. I am giving you these comments because I have high expectations and I know you can reach them. Isn't that good?
That's lovely.
But I like it because it helps your brain do exactly what you said, which is I'm not good at this yet. And that's okay.
Yes.
But my teacher has confidence that I'm going to get good at it.
My daughter's applying for colleges, or well, we're through all that now. She'll be starting college in the fall. One of the things that the school said, that the schools she picked said, is we want students, and it was like from one of the academic leaders said this in kind of an informational session. He said, we want students to experiment. We expect them to fail, but we want them to know it won't show up on their record. As long as they're trying things and doing things and experimenting, and in that situation, they will learn just as much from failing. But if you think about what he did, is he took it out of the performance failure language to the performance learning language. And then, okay, I'll experiment and fail.
Yeah. And to say, this is, so I read this in this book, this is a safe place to try. Which, holy moly, like we do not get that permission very often. I think it's, if you think about a healthy family, we want to be saying in our families, this is a healthy place for you to try. Of course, you're going to fail. Like you're not going to be able to be successful at everything. But I love that language of like, this is a safe place for you to try and fail. And we actually would expect you to do that. If you're not failing, you're not trying, right?
Well, and I thought it was so important to tell that, particularly to high-performing high school students. This won't be on your record if you've tried and experimented and learned from these failures. You're not getting an F on your transcript.
Right.
Like
that is such good language because it's the opposite of like, again, safe environment. And it's the opposite of shaming. Yeah. It is like, I don't know. Oh, have you read the book Rosie Revere, the Engineer?
No.
Oh, Sherry, it is one of my favorite. It's a kid's book.
Yeah.
But it is a great book because it's about this little girl who wants to be an engineer. And she is going to build something. She wants to build like a helicopter, I think. And so she tries and it fails. And she's like, I guess I'm not an engineer. And her mom is like, hey, but for 2 seconds it flew. And so now you just try again and you try again and you try again. And there's no shame. That's how you win in the end, right? anyway, it's a really great book of this idea of safety, and you fail 7 times, but the point is in the end, you're going to learn something really amazing. So
have you read the new or seen even the talks, Adam Grant talking about the infinite game? Oh no, Simon Sinek. Sorry, Simon Sinek.
Oh, I know Simon Sinek, but I haven't heard
the infinite game.
Okay.
And he talks about how so often we think about things and we put things in a finite game. And a finite game is you win or lose. There's clear rules. You have rules. And at the end, there's a winner declared. And he says, many, many times we are playing infinite games under finite rules. And in an infinite game, it is forever. There is no winner. You don't do, well, and the example he gives that I love is you don't do an infinite game in a marriage. There is no shared rules, and at the end, one of you wins.
Yeah.
And comparisons and all of the negativity of a finite game where you have rules and points and you're winning and you're better than them. And he talks about how often we use that lens to play to make sense of what we're doing. And I kept, as he was talking about, I kept thinking about that's learning, right? How often do we set up learning? We've got rules, we've got grades at the end of the semester. There are winners, there are losers. You know exactly where but learning isn't that way.
Right. Yeah, that's so good. And it reminds me of play, right? So this is what, when children are little and they're learning how to play, we're not saying like, okay, well, there's, now this and that. No, we're just playing with each other and learning in this student development perspective. You are developing, right? There's not an end game. We are constantly hoping that you grow and develop. Brian's saying that he read that book and he really loved it. So it's
lovely. Well, and even just that notion of when you're playing, it's not whether you're better than that person or not, or they're winning, or you're just all learning in different ways and about different things. And that's the infinite game.
Yeah. That's good. I'm going to have to read that one. Oh, I told you this is what happens is we talk about books and then they just appear on my desk. Matt's like, I think he's over here on Amazon, like order that one, order that one. Okay. So another thing that this book talks about that I wanted to discuss with you is this idea of collisions. And so they're talking about, let's just assume that we've given our students this movement into our connection brains where we're saying, these are your people, you're safe, you can try, you can fail, right? All of those things. And this book talks about creating collisions where the idea is basically that you are just going from one person to the next, kind of with this eager expectation of what this person could say to you, you could discover together, right? Like this collision that happens all the time on a campus, especially if you're orchestrating it. And that it's a really good way for us to understand ourselves in the middle of our community. And so he says when he does a job interview, it's a really big company, but he's like, when you come for your job interview, here are 8 people. I want you to go meet with these 8 people and then ask them who else you should meet with. And the interviewee is like, but like, what do we talk about? And blah, blah, blah. And he's like, just go with an eager spirit and collide with these people and then see what happens and then see who the next person is, which I just think is such a happy perspective in life versus thinking like everyone I come in contact with, I have to be really careful because we don't really know. And like, what are we going to talk about? And what's the agenda, right? It's just being like, I want to be colliding with people and have this anticipation of what we might be able to enjoy talking about together. Isn't that interesting?
It is interesting.
Yeah.
It reminds me just slightly, I don't know, I remember coaching students who were getting ready to finish degrees and they were trying to figure out what job I want. And I use this because researcher language, informational interviews, but it's a collision.
Yeah.
Go talk to them about their job. It doesn't matter if they have openings, doesn't matter if they're hiring, just go talk to them about their job, ask them about their job. you will find out very quickly whether you like it or not, whether it interests you, whether they might know somebody, but it's like a setup collision.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
I hadn't thought about that.
And so, yeah, so the idea would just be that we are providing for our students with each other, like students with students, but also for all of the people who work on campus, that you would just say, Matt and I were talking about even just walking across campus with a student, instead of a like, I'm going to this place and now we're gonna, the idea that you'd be like, oh, there's our friend so-and-so, hey, I want to introduce you to this person, have that conversation. I don't know, Sherry, I'm super efficient, so I'm like, when I'm going to place, I'm going to place, you know what I mean? But I just wonder if I could, like, one time I was saying this about church, like I go to church and then I leave church, like that's what I'm doing, right? But approaching that as like a, let's just see who I run into, that would be very hard work for me. I would have to work very, very hard.
I'm also thinking about the people that I consider connectors.
Yeah.
Whenever you talk to them, they say, oh, you should talk to so-and-so. Oh, you should talk. Like maybe that's the, I don't know, embrace your inner connector for 30 minutes while you're with the student wandering around. Oh, you should talk to so-and-so. You should talk. Let me introduce you. Because those connectors are so valuable.
Absolutely.
And they're some of my favorite people. And they're my favorite people to frankly have a collision with, to just call them and go, hey, what are you working on right now? Like, like, because I learn so much. I meet new people and they seem to have that. Maybe it is an extrovert skill.
Maybe it is. I was just saying, I have a dear, dear friend who, when I was in grad school, I was in my danger brain. So I'm sending out like, nobody talk to me, like stay away from me. And this girl walked over to me and said something about like, I like your mug, and sat down next to me. And I was like, what is wrong with you? Why are you ignoring the New York vibe that's like, go on your way? I don't know why. And she was just like, we're going to be friends and you're going to be friends with everybody in this class. So we're going to have parties and I'm going to invite them. Like, she just was one of those connector people who was like, we are a community and we're going to act like it. And I'm going to teach you how to do that. And so I had a great master's degree experience because I had a connector who was just like, I'm doing this. Those people are precious.
Don't you think too, that they not only create the collision stuff, but they also sort of, I can't think of any other word but Sherpa. They take you along, but they also teach you, like when we did the Macmillan and Chavez kind of research, and they teach you about membership. They teach you the language. They teach you the behaviors. They teach you the traditions. And it's not that they're lecturing you, it's that they're helping you along so that you can feel membership. So you recognize the language. So you see the symbols. So yeah.
So it's really interesting because that self-confidence of the leader, they are lending you their certainty that they belong. Right. Yes. Which yes. I'm always shocked by it when somebody is like, oh no, I belong and we're going to be connected and I'm going to help you understand the lay of the land. You really are depending on their certainty that they belong and that they're going to be connected to people. And then eventually they're helping you into that, right? So that you have your own piece there. But I love that idea. If we could recognize our students who are feeling uncertain. It's a great segue to your mapping who's going to eat lunch.
Oh, okay. So I just saw this on Facebook by 4 different people. So you know who my friends are, right? This story of an elementary school teacher who I think on Fridays, she asked every student in her class who they plan to eat lunch with next week. And she maps out all the students and she uses that map to figure out who's not connected, who's not included, who might be being bullied. And therefore she can help address that the following week. And every week she was doing it. And it so warms my heart because that is what students need because they don't know how to do some of this.
That's right.
And how else do you know? Teachers can't see everything.
Right. And it's such a great example of her being certain of her membership, right? Like she is certain she belongs in that class because she's the teacher. Yep. And also her commitment to having a safe class so that you don't have kids who are in danger brain. They actually have moved then to connection. It's just a really great example of somebody being like, I'm going to leverage my sense of belonging to make sure that everybody has that sense of belonging as well. So good. Yeah, I'm gonna have to look that up because I'm really fascinated to look into that. Okay, so in this book, they're talking about action items, and we're gonna actually spend a lot of time on action items because I think that if you, I know everybody's tired of me talking about the success funnel, but sorry, this is how my brain works. So if you take the success funnel and apply it to any group of students, so we're thinking about students who might be uncertain about their sense of belonging. I'm not sure that this is a safe place for me to try. I'm not certain anybody sees me. I'm not sure of the rules and membership, right? Okay. So we're thinking about things like on a mostly residential campus, maybe a commuter, right? Or we're thinking about deciding students who don't have their major yet. Or I did a study at the university I worked with on Myers-Briggs. And so the vast majority of our students were ENFP, which is like a very like happy, extroverted, like ideas and right. And you could see that in so many parts of the culture. But you might have our engineering students who are not like that, right? And so they're going to not experience a sense of belonging in this very ENFP culture. So we're identifying groups of students who might have some hesitancy, right, about whether or not they are connected. And then we're moving through and we're using these best practices in that connection piece to build in very specific ways we are talking to students, very specific experiences that they're having that are going to send out those belonging cues that then are going to train them to be more connection brain instead of fear brain. Okay, so some of them are really simple. I'm not going to spend time on them, but I think they're worth saying. So listen well and over communicate that you're listening, which I really like. They're like, don't interrupt. They said so often there's an expression which is like slightly forward in your chair, eyebrows raised, nodding. Like you need to make sure that students are like, yes, what I'm saying is very important and interesting to you, right? Okay, overdue thank yous. So you should be thanking people all the time for even little things that they're doing. When you thank people and you have this attitude of gratitude, they're more likely to want to be helpful. There are a lot of studies about like, hey, when somebody gets a thank you, they'll do that again, more likely, right? Pick up trash, which I appreciate. This is like a way that you're saying, hey, this is our community. We want to take care of it, right? These little gestures. And then the last little one is don't sandwich feedback, which I think is really interesting because they're like, hey, in the best cultures where people really belong, feedback and positive, so like a correction and then positive, those things are very separate. When I have to give you correction, I'm going to say, hey, I need to talk to you about something. Here's what I want you to do. Here's what I see. Here's what I want you to do differently. But the part that I love is radiate delight. So in cultures where people feel like they really belong, when somebody does something great, leaders are like, oh my gosh, I love that. That was awesome. That was a great idea. We should do that. Do more of that, right? It's not a like, and I'm going to reserve this until we have a conversation and I can sandwich. It's like, I'm really delighted with my team and all of the great things they do, which I think is super fun. So I love that one. The ones I want to camp on though, first of all, previewing future connections, which you touched on when you're talking about like, how do we facilitate connections on our campus as we're walking through? I like this one because it's a way for us to say to our students, these are people who in the future are going to be important to you. Right? I think it's why we do move-in day on so many of our campuses the way we do, where we're like, this is your president, these are advisors, these are like all of these people who are going to form your community. We're going to preview those connections for you so that when you see them on campus, you're like, oh, right, that's the guy who helped me move in. Also, he's my dean of students or whatever, right? So this language of saying, these are key members of your community. When Matt and I worked with this school in Alaska, we found out that in Alaskan villages, so these are Alaskan natives, in Alaskan villages, when you go to a new village, the first thing you do is walk the village, which is you just start usually you have to fly into a village. So usually at the airstrip, and you just walk around and meet all the people. And it's like, here's the grandma who does this, and here's this family who does this. And you walk the village. And thinking about doing that for our students, right? When we're designing orientation for this Alaskan school, we're like, you have to walk the village because you need to meet. Here's the person who's going to help you with your math. And here's the person that you go to when you need keys for your room or whatever. I just love that. Welcome to all of these people who sometime in the future, you're going to be really connected to.
And that's so interesting because it's walk the village people.
Right.
It's not the standard tour that we give. This
right.
building is the arts and sciences building. This building is, there's the rugby field. There's it's the people. That's
which, I mean, if we're honest, the best part of campus tours is when you run into the dean of the College of Business and the tour guide's like, this is the dean of the College of Business, right? And then you have that conversation. So yeah, you and I were talking about just how hard it is for schools to communicate these connections and this community piece. And walking the people is a great way to do that.
I love it. Well, even, I mean, like at some level, if you think about it from a student perspective, up here is the administration building and the registrar's office and the blah, blah, and you're going to pay your bills at the registrar's office.
Yeah.
I mean, what if instead it was, oh, Jane, the registrar, her and her staff help you deal with bill. Like if I were 18 and you said the administration building and I would be,
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, that's this. Like set off the scared brain, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
In fact, I was thinking about when I was doing advising for deciding students, we had a deciding dinner where I wasn't standing up in front of everyone being like, hey guys, so that you know, they just saw me. I served them ice cream and we had a quick chat. And then someone was like, hey, so Rachel's going to be your deciding advisor. But it is like, please know me. And then remember, if you have a question about this thing, it's me. I'm the person who was serving you ice cream, right?
And you're a lot less scary than the undecided major advisor who's in that building, in that office.
No one is ever coming to see me if they just, right? It's like your probation officer. It's like we're talking about academic recovery. Like you have to go see your probation officer. How about if you just say, go see Rachel? That would be way less scary, right? So thinking about how we do those previews, I also was reminded of this study in the book where it was an experiment where they're like, hey, you have to do this really hard thing. And then after you start, it's a puzzle. Somebody comes in and is like, hey, here's a note from Steve. He did this puzzle before you. He thought this would be helpful. And it's like the note holds nothing helpful, right? But the person who gets it works 50% longer on the puzzle, does a better job because it says to your brain like, oh, we're connected to this, group of people.
Steve. Yeah.
And so, Steve, good old Steve was looking out for me, but thinking about how do we leverage that in these relationships to be able to say for any of those cohorts of students, how do we have somebody who's done it before come back and say, I see you, you're going to be successful. You are just 2 years away from me being in this position that I'm in now, right? Super powerful.
I also just read something where they were talking about how to improve your writing in like newsletters and stuff, like, because I read terribly boring things, but what was so lovely is the woman was saying that specificity is the key, and it's the same thing. So instead of, and she had some story about some rock stars I didn't know, or I did know them, but I don't know the story. But I thought it was interesting. She said, if you just say, hey, an aging rock star had a fight with his friend and they did this, it's all up. But if you say it was so-and-so and they were wearing this and they were, and it's the same thing I think that we're talking about. If the person that helps you is going to be Rachel and she's this, or the person who's in front of the room is not just, a graduating senior this year, it is, Jose who made it
Right.
And he's telling you
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
This
I am similar
specificity.
to you. Yeah. I am similar to you.
Yeah.
Recognize yourself in me. Yeah. That's really good.
Yeah.
The next one that I want to talk about is eliminate bad apples. And so this one is really interesting because this book talks about how one bad actor, you might have a group of 4 people and one of them is a Confederate and their job is to be a slacker or be a jerk or be whatever. And it ruins the group because people are just like, okay, well, never mind. I guess we're all going to do this. But it's not, the communication is, this is not a safe place to be, right? And I think we struggle sometimes with this on campus because we do have a lot of at-risk students, but those are different than bad apple students. In other words, students who, they really are red flag students. They are not healthy members of our community. They are not intent in trying to develop or like those sorts of things, right? They really are just students who are like, this is stupid and I hate it and I'm going to be destructive and I'm not going to follow the rules and I'm going to do whatever I want to. And I know it's really hard on a campus because we want all of our students to be successful, but thinking about the threat to your other students' connection brain, when you have a student who's like, I'm just going to do whatever I want and there's nothing you can do about it, right? That is scary. That does scare students. And so being able to identify those students, Sherry, one time when I was teaching a class, I had all of my students, it was a UN100 class. I had them all do genograms, which is where, they say like, here's the family I come from and here's interesting. And I had a student who was a leader who did the most ridiculous genogram I've ever seen. I'm pretty sure like it might as well have been written on a napkin because he did it at lunch, like right before, right? So all these people are getting up and sharing really meaningful things. And then this student gets up and like holds up this terrible thing. And so afterwards I said, hey, you have to come to my office. And then I said, that was a terrible job. And you're really important to our class. You're a leader. And so I would like for you to apologize to the class and do it again and do it with integrity and do it with seriousness. And he was like, okay. And so the next class he got up and said, hey guys, I totally blew that off. I didn't do a good job. Here's what I want to tell you about my family, and did a wonderful job. What I love about that is that if I had let that go, what I'm saying to my class is, this isn't a safe place for you to try. Because you don't have to, you can get away with a genogram on a napkin, right? But instead, being able to go back and say, hey, I have to address that. You are incredibly important to our class. People are watching what you're doing. We have high standards. I think you can reach them. You need to go back and apologize to your community so that we can all stay in that connection brain. I think is so important. And obviously that's a great example where a student like recovered. They don't.
Yeah, it worked. Yay.
Like we're not talking about the times where we're like, oh, that didn't go so great. Right?
Well, what it reminds me of though, is when you see sometimes policies where we let students stay and they're really not getting it. They're not trying. Yeah. They're not like, because I remember a campus I was working with where they had a policy that anybody that got a 0.00 GPA was out after one semester. Like at some level, if you were all zeros, you were out. You could apply to appeal, but otherwise you were out. And the campus, I think higher up leadership had some other thoughts, and they were trying to say it was going to take 2. Give them 2. And it was the residence hall folks who came and said, look, you don't know what they do to our community in the residence halls.
That's right.
That those people staying creates an environment that is not conducive for the rest of our students. That is a bad change you're proposing. Yeah. Please let the, appeal process work the way it should, but for the others, let them leave.
It doesn't seem like they're being, I feel like it would take a lot of work to get a zero GPA,
You gotta
be real
zero. Yeah. At least that's my take on it. And that's what the appeal process is for.
Exactly.
If there was a scenario where it absolutely all fell off the rails for some whatever reason, then use the
We can
appeal
talk
process
about it.
appropriately.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. I think it's really interesting too, because it is contagious. And so, we are always talking about, for example, if you hold the worst res hall for your late applicants and you put them all together there, they lack institutional commitment. They weren't sure they wanted to come, which is why they didn't decide until August, right? And then they're all together and it is like, okay, nobody wants to be here, right? We worked with a school where they had a daily chapel and their juniors and seniors were awful in chapel. They were on their phones, they were talking to each other, it was awful. And we were like, hey, when you get your new freshmen, you need to separate your freshmen out and reteach them how to do chapel. Because when you put them with these juniors and seniors who are saying, this is stupid, nobody does it, right? What you're saying to them is, this is not a safe place for you to be. The only way for you to fit in is to be disrespectful, like these upperclassmen are teaching you, right? So that idea of like, sometimes we have to say, we've got to take these people out because it will be contagious to other people. It takes a lot to stand up under somebody saying, I'm too cool for this, I'm not doing it, right? I'm just going to be a slacker. Pretty difficult. Okay, we've talked about this next one a little bit, create safe collision-rich spaces, which I really like. We've talked about collision, but thinking about where are the spaces where people just run into each other? And how are your buildings like that? How is your cafeteria like that? I was saying this morning as I was thinking about this, the psychology building on my campus was the oldest building on campus. You literally would walk in the door and go down a hallway. The first door on the right was our main classroom. And then you would leave that way. And we never ran into anyone. There was no chance of ever running into anybody, right? Because you're just going to your class and you're leaving. Versus some of these buildings that have like atriums for you to hang out with, right? And see your faculty. And so how do we, for each of those populations, create this rich space where you can collide with other people and have these ideas? Mary Hardin Baylor's football stadium is in the middle of campus, but it is connected to their campus center. So their cafeteria, all of their offices, like everything looks out at this beautiful stadium. And it's just such a great example of running into people because it's the center of campus and everybody's in there doing different things, but definitely gives an opportunity for collisions.
Aren't there also activities that create collision opportunities? Because
Yeah.
I was just thinking of this and I have no idea why it came back to me, but I remember being in an econ class that had like 75 people. So I didn't think that professor knew I was there, which was fine, whatever. But I remember doing a volunteer walk and she was on it.
Ooh.
And she saw me and she goes, "You're in my econ 102 class." And I was like, yeah, but like those activities that put faculty with students, staff with students doing something different can be a collision opportunity that's
For sure.
unusual.
We've talked before about Tinker Day. We serve Hollins and they do, the president calls off and you get to hike up a mountain and, have a picnic at the top. Such a great example of like, hey, our whole community is doing this and you're going to be walking next to somebody that maybe you haven't talked to before. And so I love that. I was actually thinking about when I was in school, computer labs were a great environment to collide with other people because you just like, hey, we're in here, we're doing work and we're going to meet people that maybe we wouldn't otherwise. So, but I think those have gone the way. I don't think that happens anymore. Okay. And then this last one I want to talk about is capitalize on threshold moments. So that's how this book talks about threshold moments are moments of arrival. And so they happen for sure for our freshmen and orientation, all that stuff. But this book talks about moments of arrival even within a day. Yeah. So if you think about when I was teaching, my favorite part of my class was when everyone was arriving. And when I would say like, hey, so how's it going today? How'd you do on your test? Like those moments of arrival are really, really important. I was thinking about all of the stuff of like membership and influence and those places where we say, okay, welcome, you are here with us now. We are all together. And now we're going to do this thing, recognizing how important those moments of arrival are. There's an example in the book of how everybody who works at Pixar on their first day, whether they're a director or they work in the cafe, they all bring them into this movie theater and they say, whatever you were before, you are a filmmaker now, and we need you to help us make the best films that we can. I love that. I was thinking about for a college saying, like, whatever you were before, you are an ACU student now, and we need you to help us make this the best community it can be. Such a nice welcoming with language, right? To define this membership.
Well, and thinking about all the different arrivals, because I do think you're right. We do a fairly good job with orientation. Yeah. We understand how important setting the tone is, but how they arrive to an appointment.
Yeah.
Like, what are we doing with people when they show up? How do they arrive to, the thing that I always think about is silly stuff like sophomore year. I mean, the whole residence hall is different people, different everything. The whole class schedule is different. How do we handle that arrival? How do we handle the arrival at graduation?
Yeah.
Is it chaos?
Or if you think about even like office hours, right? Like when a student appears in your doorway, the delight that you have on your face, hi, come on in, right? Versus like, hi, do you need something? We were talking about res life, how important that is, and how you could make it your craft to teach your RAs, hey, when people, my experience would have been completely different if I had an RA that when I came back to my res hall said, hey, Rachel, how was psychology? Yeah. That would have been a completely different experience. I mostly just felt like I could come in and out of my res hall and no one was paying any attention. Like nobody cared. Like nobody knows if I'm here or not, right?
There's people that talk about this even in parenting. If you're excited to see your child, what does that do for their life? Like when they walk in the room, are you so busy you're not paying? Like, yeah, I think you're exactly right. Residence halls, class, everywhere. Yeah. Like if you're excited that somebody's walking in, what does that do to tell them that they belong?
I also really, to get on my soapbox about majors, one of the reasons why I love the idea of a deciding major so much is because I think that that is a moment of arrival into this group, instead of being like, we don't know what you are, right? But instead saying like, hey, we have language for you. Come and be part of us while you're in this journey. And then you're going to go and be part somewhere else. But the idea that we would welcome people in that way, instead of just being like, oh yeah, we don't really have a place for you, so I don't really know, like, good luck with that.
We're going to put you in this advising center for all those people who don't know.
Right. Instead of like, welcome, this is going to be really exciting, right? So I am really interested in how we build an RA program to say, this is how you are going to greet students in the welcoming, coming in and out of the res halls, and even just knowing their schedule and how was the test, you know, and how did that go? And where have you been? You know, those sorts of things that you would expect from a family, from a connection in a community. So, okay, well, those are a lot of little things that we can do, but I'm really excited about them. I think that we can be incredibly intentional about building each of those elements into our different cohorts and different, I mean, I'm even thinking about like you said, like we do that for freshmen, but what about sophomores and what about juniors and seniors and some of those outlier cohorts that we can use these belonging cues to keep them in their connection brain. And Sherry, I'm going to have to think about even thinking within talking to students. I just think if you could help them understand risk adverse versus connection brain, the kind of self-talk that they could then do to say, this is uncomfortable and scary, but these are my people and I belong here. And so I'm going to be open and eager to collide, right? Would make a huge difference. We got to write a book.
Well, it's the exact opposite of imposter syndrome of, I don't know if I should be here and nobody else has figured it out. And it's the opposite of that. It's the, I don't know what I'm doing, but these people are here to help me.
Yeah. And so often it's really funny. I say a lot of times, like, I pretend to be really good friends with someone until we become connected, but it is the same sort of brain. Like, I'm going to act like this is a person that I'm going to be connected with because they're part of my circle. And then that kind of behavior, guess what, creates connections and community. So I love it. I think we're going to be talking about this a lot in the future. Just best practices of teaching schools how to be intentional with these belonging cues. It's really exciting. So thank you for joining me. I always, like I tell you every time, I learn so much and also always have such a good time. I like colliding with you, Sherry. We should do it more often.
And I always walk away with at least a few books I got to go look up.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is good.
Well, thanks for joining me, friends. Thanks for joining me. We will see you next week. Have a happy Tuesday.